become thoroughly radicalized in prison. He wants to go to Palestine to kill Jews. Then they try to get him to be involved in the Sufi movement, yeah. They try to get him to be involved in the Sufi movement. He says, that ain't violent enough for me. And he wants to become a Salafi, Takfiri. He's moping around for a month or two, and eventually he meets up with the Tunisian, Serhan. Where are you, Serhan? You're up here somewhere. There you are. Who becomes a sort of substitute radical preacher in the mosque. He's left his economics scholarship. He's become increasingly radicalized with his friends, especially in soccer. He's expelled from the mosque. He has nothing to do, by the way. These groups of students have nothing to do with the drug pushers. This is where they push the drugs in the same neighborhood of Lava PS. But the interesting thing is, it's all the same neighborhood. Whoops. So this is where they push drugs. This is the restaurant all these guys would eat at, called the Alhambra restaurant, where they eat sandwiches. I like that. They'd all play soccer in front of the Ulad Aksha's house in Villa Verde. Those were the two guys who kicked the habit with the little Napoleon guy. But here's the most amazing thing. 5 of the 7 guys, so they do this plot. The plot is hatched from October to December. They still don't know what they're doing, right? But Jamal, this sort of hands-on guy, this drug dealer who's actually killed people and who actually goes up in the middle of the plot to blow away 2 guys in Bilbao for not giving them the drug money because he needed the drug money in order to buy the explosives for the jihad. 5 of those 7 guys who blew themselves up were the drug guys who had found religion and who only got into the plot a few months before it was hatched. The plot itself, by the way, they concocted it finally when they downloaded something on the internet from the Zarqawi website which said, why don't you blow up something in Spain before the elections? And finally they found something to do. The students who had been yelling for 3 years, 4 years about something to do, finally found a little guy who was willing to get the dynamite to them and actually do something. And the interesting thing is, 5 of the 7 guys who blew themselves up all came from one neighborhood. 2 were brothers, all linked to that friend Jamal Ahmidan, that little Napoleon guy. A guy named Kunja, who was known as the first Afghan in the neighborhood because he put on this Afghan smock, this hat, and started preaching Takfiri. And a candy salesman, a gay candy salesman named Rifat. These were the guys who blew themselves up when the police captured them, cornered them in Madrid. Now, Kunja's cousin was married to a guy named Hamza, and these guys, all in 2006 and 2007, went to Iraq to blow themselves up. They all came from this neighborhood, within 400 square meters, grew up as kids together, went to this elementary school called the Abdul Karim Khattabi Elementary School, and we're all in the same class since first grade. This is the kids coming out of the school. This is the kids going to the school. Now, Kunja preached in this mosque, but again, it's not in the mosque. We thought it was in the mosque. There was an article in the Washington Post when we first gave this information, which said, they're Al-Qaeda recruiters. Al-Qaeda, I'm looking for the Al-Qaeda recruiter. All I see is the donkey. And we find out most of the stuff is going on in the Chicago Cafe. That's because that's where things happen. People watch Al Jazeera and they get super hyped. I don't know if you've ever watched Al Jazeera News. You get 15 minutes of Iraq. It's not like watching CNN or Fox. You see fathers running through the streets of Baghdad with the brains of their children falling out. You get 5 minutes of Palestine, pretty gruesome images as well, and 1 minute for the rest of the world. It's a little bit like Fox in reverse, right? This is the scene right below the mosque where they play soccer and jihad. They were all soccer buddies, and they all went as soccer buddies to Iraq. Then I went to Ceuta, which is a nearby Spanish enclave, and I was asking the kids, I'm trying to figure out, why do these guys do it? How do they get involved? So I say to them, who are your heroes? So they say to me, okay, first hero, this is about 50, a sample of about 50. First hero is Ronaldinho. Okay, he's the Brazilian soccer star from the Barca team. Everybody's either a Barca soccer fan or a Madrid soccer fan. In fact, there are 2 cafes in this plaza. One right there, which is the Madrid cafe for the Madrid guys and the other for the Barca guys, but they're both showing Al Jazeera all the time. The Terminator is number 2, but they have no idea that he's related to the present governor of California. And number 3 is Osama bin Laden. So why do they do it and people in our society not? Well, Muslims in our society buy into the American dream. Okay? The demographics on Muslims in the United States society exactly mirror the average of the United States society. Muslims in Europe, in Spain, for example, are 19 times more likely to be poor, marginal, and it goes more or less in the same fashion for the rest of Western Europe. We find, for example, there is no radicalization. Despite the hype you get in Congress, and I've testified in front of God knows how many organizations and committees and whatnot, there have only been really 2 cases of radicalization in a prison population of 2.3 million. I mean, that's not a lot, okay? But 60 to 70% of the Muslims, of European prison populations are Muslim. Very much like African Americans in the United States, and for very much the same reasons. So there are no reasons, in a sense, social reasons, for Muslims to become radicalized in the United States. The problem of radicalization in prisons in the United States is basically among Afro-Americans, not Muslims who originated from foreign sources. And what makes someone become radicalized, to take the path of violence, is first of all not humiliation again, okay? It's moral outrage. And that moral outrage is often lived vicariously, looking at the internet or on television, where people feel that their people are being violated, murdered, or whatever. Now that is a virtual imagined community. Why should someone who lives in the jungles of Sulawesi, this remote island where anthropologists like myself would dream about going a generation ago because they were cannibals 3 generations ago, and people in Morocco or Spain dream about the same thing when they've never been out of their villages? That's only possible, again, because of this sort of massive media-driven transnational awakening. And it's creating a virtual community. That virtual community, that media-driven virtual community, is being created to a large extent as well by the actions of the United States. I'm not going to go into that. Everybody knows the story. All I can report to you is that the greatest heroic thing any of these young people can do is say, go to Iraq and fight American soldiers. They dream of it. They've never been out of Borneo or Sumatra. They dream of fighting Americans in Iraq. I'm not going to go through any of this. I will go towards the end about what not to do. I have many prescriptions about what not to do, like spend millions of dollars to study the Quran or make predictive models and widgets. I mean, look at these guys. You're going to predict this male strip dancer is the key link between the losers in the Spanish prison and these drug guys and these students who couldn't get it together. Come on. You're never going to get that with scale-free modeling or scale-more modeling or God knows what. But how do you deal with it? Well, this moral outrage becomes effective only if it personally resonates with you. Okay? It doesn't personally resonate with Muslims in the United States. There's just nothing to resonate with. It does resonate with people in Europe, in North Africa, and in the Middle East. If police, for example, are particularly hostile, then although you don't experience the violence of occupation or invasion or anything else, you start empathizing with it. And that's what we find again and again. We find the most successful people at stopping the jihad are people who treat it as a public health problem and it's not a criminal problem. The way the Saudis, the way the Turks, the way the Indonesians have virtually stopped Salafi attacks is basically go to the families, the friends, the relatives, the neighborhood, and say, look, we don't want a problem. What can we do so that people don't take the path of violence? They give gifts in Ramadan, they find jobs, they talk to the families. Now, this is being filmed. One senior law enforcement agent who was a witness to testimony by these various heads of intelligence said, can you see me with Timothy McVeigh. I mean, one of these guys, the head of one of these intelligence, was actually hugging a mass suicide bomber who had been released because he was much more effective at getting others to turn than if he had stayed in prison and been hung or shot. So he's out hugging this suicide bomber, and this senior American law enforcement agent says, "Can you imagine me hugging Timothy McVeigh? I'd be hanging my balls from the dome of Congress." So it is very hard for law enforcement in the United States to go into this mindset because of our laws. But I want to tell you, it is very successful. There hasn't been a single Salafi incident in Turkey, for example, since the Istanbul bombings, and in Indonesia since 2005. So how do we deal with it? And this is sort of conclusion. Well, of course, we have to deal with problems of social alienation in these societies. But more important, think of things like the Boy Scouts, high school football. Now, where did that come from? Why did it work? It worked because we were an immigrant society and we